That's one of the symptoms. Like, you know, I think it's my wife. A number of times I've took them. Thanks for yeah, it's a very good secretary, right?
All right, socks. That was the question, the main question. Socks or cups? There should be no question.
Okay.
We are.
He said somewhere in the nation and then
There she is, yeah, back. Right there. I'm like a tour guide.
You found her.
Here. You know, we have 2 exits at the front, 4 over the way, and 2 at the rear of the aircraft.
You're doing well.
I'm going to move over here. I think I can see it here.
I want to go on both. I'm talking getting a flush of ours.
Go on in. Anna is for Fulton to be on gathering in Guinevere. What Bishop? You're very welcome. It's a great privilege for me to invite you all, or to welcome you all to the Fitzpatrick gathering here in Portlaoise. You're very welcome. There are some things that we do, and we do them deliberately to make things happen. There are some announcements we have to make, so the weekend will go well. There are some people we like to would volunteer, and if you don't, you'll be volunteered, as in the army. But we have to do all of those things to make the thing work. I can do so much, but I can't do a number of things today at the same time that all have to be done before lunch hour. Okay? So we will need a few volunteers. So the registration is going on over there. If you're good enough to register, that's great.
What would you volunteer for?
I'll tell you in a minute. Would you wait? Would you? You're terribly impatient, mister.
Half an hour.
I'm not. I'm introducing it. Would you let me get on with it? Would you?
Could y'all stop fighting?
Who's fighting? Anyway, listen. There are a number of things. The first and most important thing is lunch. Okay? We need to get you, when we finish here at about 12 o'clock, we need to get you through the dining system, right? So that you're ready to leave here at about 1-ish. I always say that we're Irish, and the ish means to do with time, right? So we say something is 9:30-ish, we mean it's kind of 9:45, you know? But you'll understand as the weekend goes on. So to get you through the food, what we normally do is we ask people, if they don't want to have a main meal, and you won't really have time for a main meal, you've had a big breakfast and you're going to have a big meal tonight, so all you really want at lunch hour is a soup and a sandwich, and you got through fairly quickly. Soup, a sandwich and a cup of tea. And they have agreed to provide 4 options of a sandwich. I don't know what the soup is. Probably consomme. Being Fitzpatrick,
Fitzpatrick
it's
soup.
consomme, right? So there's 4 options. There's a chicken, a ham, a roast beef, or a salad sandwich, whichever you want, okay? If we can get the orders to these people in advance, so we do this when we're having the cup of tea, if we can get it to them by then, they will have it all ready for us at 1 o'clock or at 12 o'clock, and you just go in, it'll be in the main dining room, right, where you had your breakfast this morning, and it'll be very quick, and it's a tenner a head, okay? So if you want to do that, you will, in the dining room, you will either charge it to your room, right, and you'll have to prove your room number, or you'll have to pay a tenner before they hand you sandwiches. Is that all right? They're as cute out they are in this part of the world, I tell you, right? So that's organised. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pass around the thing. If you put your initials in one of the boxes, okay? So I'm going to start mine. I'm going to have a ham sandwich, and I'm starting with RF, okay? And I want it on brown, so I'm putting a W down. I don't know why I put that. It should be a BB for brown, okay? So mine is the first ham sandwich there. You see what's required of you. If you have any difficulty with that, ask the person beside you. I won't be able to help you, right? So if I pass that around, if you want that, it's a tenner a head, or charge to your room. That's fair enough.
Yes.
So if I start you there, okay? And if you would pass that around, and I want that back before the end of the first. So that's the lunch. The second thing I want to talk to you about is the dinner. The dinner, as you know, is included in your price if you bought the package. Not everybody bought the package. Some people are just working bed and breakfast. Some people are not staying in the hotel. Some people are staying in guest houses outside on the road, and some people live in the area, so they're not staying in the hotel either. So if you don't have the package organised that I organised with the hotel, your dinner tonight is not included, and you have to buy that. Okay? That fair enough? Yeah. And the cost of that was €40. I've done a deal with them, and it's now down to 35. Okay? It's a little bit more than you would pay, and you get a little bit more, I think, than you would pay for the meal in the dining room. But it'll be all set up in here. It'll be like the wedding was last night. I think. Okay. So that's 35 if you're not. So there will be somebody. I need a volunteer, right? So I need a volunteer to collect payment from people for the dinner if they're not staying. So that's the first volunteer I need. Right? Then we have coach trips, one this afternoon and one tomorrow. The idea is the coach will be here at 1 o'clock, and hopefully we will be on the road by 1:15. That fair enough? The coach will be leaving at the front of the hotel, and the cost of the coach trip each day, depending on whether you want to go or you don't want to go. Some people have been on it before and they may not want to go again this time, so we try to accommodate that. If you're going on the coach trip, it's a tenner per person for each trip. Is that okay? So a tenner for the Saturday, a tenner for the Sunday for each person if you want to come with us. Okay? I need people then to, John is already collecting for today. Okay, I need somebody to do a collection for tomorrow.
I'll do it.
Okay, so Monica will do tomorrow. That's grand. Okay. And then the next one then would be a raffle. We always have a raffle. Okay. Don't know what we're going to raffle. Barry, are you free? We're raffling you. Will be.
You're not raffling Barry, are you? What do you mean?
Might raffle her off. So we have a raffle, right? It's just a way of raising a few bob. So all good organisations have a raffle. Is that fair enough? So that's it. Registration, dinner, coach trips, tickets, raffle, lunch for order form, and you charge it to your own. Okay, wait now. What's here? Okay, no, that's all there. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So now that's all the announcements done, I think. So as I say, you're very, very welcome. We're going to start off.
Ronan, my books. Just
Oh,
say-
sorry, the books. Yes.
I have a few books to
Yes,
sell.
Colleen has a few books that she wants to sell. If anybody's interested in buying them, where are they?
Right there.
They're over there on the
Not
table.
many, not many.
Not many.
Just what the
There's only a
suitcase
few
would
of them.
carry.
She couldn't carry too many of them, but there's a few there for sale if you're interested in buying them. You're very welcome.
Every book comes with a free autograph.
Of who?
And you send them a photograph as well. Will you? You send them a photograph as well.
Oh, they're cheaper.
All right, so €30. 30 euros.
Yeah.
Yeah, 30 euros. So look, we're all set to go, yeah?
one who was sort of fairly new to this. Is there any reason why we don't have any kind of name stickers?
Oh yes, oh absolutely, absolutely, most important, right? Some people love name stickers. I deliberately don't give you name stickers for two reasons. First of all, they're very expensive, right? I'm trying to keep the cost down, right? But most important of all, if you have a name and it says Jimmy Smith, well, I'm not talking to him. Right? So you have to go and you have to ask the person, who are you and where are you from? And you have to talk and engage with people. Is that fair enough?
Yes.
So that's why it's done.
Very
That's exactly why it's done. No other reason, right? And we want you to do that. And I particularly would suggest to you that you find the Irish people and talk to them, because they've wonderful experience of the whole thing. Some of the people who are here from Ireland have been here since day one, right? They were the people who got the whole thing going. I didn't quite get it going. There were other people around as well.
Oh, you did?
I know I didn't.
You did?
Yes, you did.
Yes, you did.
No, I didn't. Anyway, that's why you don't have name stickers, right? So you ask the guy the name, right? And I suppose it's only right to say a very special welcome to Eileen Rose, who has come to be with us. She's only 3 months old, and she's the youngest we've ever had, right? So look, I think I've spent long enough. It's 9:30ish. It's nearly 5 to 10. Brian has been speaking to us, spoken to us before about his family. He has a wonderful Fitzpatrick set of stories, right? And he has written about one of his uncles, his Uncle Jimmy, who came to live here in Dublin. But today he's going to talk to us about his grandpa's Indian summer. So will you welcome, please, Brian Fitzpatrick.
Well, my name's Brian Fitzpatrick, as you've heard, from Perth in Scotland. And can you all hear me at the back?
Yes.
All right? Yeah. I'm starting at 9:35-ish, and I hope to finish not 9:10-ish. So it's about my grandpa. I don't go too far back in history because I get confused. And I may say some things that will help one or two of the newcomers here to say, oh, I must try what he did, because I'm still trying to solve my background in a way that will make complete sense and into a book. So this is my third time at the podium, and you may say, not him again, or you may say, why? And the reason for why is that I was here in Kilkenny in 2007, and I told a true story. I had a perfect recipe because I had a family tree detailed, I had stories of the family, and I had a couple of photos of gravestones, and I thought that was it. I was in the pound seats. And so there it went on to internet, and it sat there for 2 years without anybody looking at it except myself on a daily basis. And then in comes 2 emails to say I was wrong. So we're going for that. So I had to come back in 2013 again to Kilkenny, and I had to sort of apologise and start again. But coming away from that, I thought, I still haven't really got that far into my grandfather. I'll need to do a bit more work. So I'm here now. Keep your fingers crossed. So what I've got as a starting point is the family tree as it was much showed in 2007. The top left you'll see Reverend Hugh Fitzpatrick. Now the good thing in the late 19th century, early 20th century was somebody of importance like a minister. Anything he did, if he coughed, it went into a newspaper. If he did a wedding or a funeral, into a newspaper. If he did a sermon. If he argued, as this one did, then it went into a newspaper. So I had a lot of information on him that I was able to produce a reasonable presentation. He had 6 children, one of whom was my grandfather. Hugh Montgomery, which are my middle names, and Monty is what he was called. So let's go on with that. There is my grandfather, great-grandfather, sorry, the minister. If you see me tonight, if you see me at the table tonight sitting cross-legged with a menu card in my hands, looking a bit confused, what is an Irish stew made of? You know, it's the genetics, it's the genes that has come down. I'm part of the cross-legged, bemused, confused Fitzpatrick group. And if you see me tomorrow at breakfast with curlers in my hair, with a narrow tray, because I've taken it from a maternal side. So there you go. Watch me tonight and tomorrow at breakfast. So there is what I did in 2007 about Monty. I knew when he was born, I knew when he died, and I didn't know too much in between, but I did know that he, as well as all the other of the family, seemed to do a runner as soon as they left school. The serious minister, thou shalt not smile on a Sunday, no music. I think they got fed up and ran away. So he went out, I believe, I haven't got it up here, but I believe he went to Malaya as a tin mine manager, because tin mining in Malaya was 70% of the world's produce in the early part of the 20th century. So I don't have too much. I've got some evidence that he did that, because when he had a medical later, he was seen to be frail because of problems that he picked up overseas in Malaya. But what I've got definite is that he came back to Scotland not very well. He went into a fever hospital in Edinburgh, and there he met a nurse, my granny, Janet or Jessie. He married her in September 2012, and that's what I've got proof of. She put on her marriage certificate that she was 28. Anybody else cheated here? Eh? Actually, my great-grandfather, the Reverend, he took 6 years off. So it's another trait, but it's not come down to me. So he married her. Whether she had wrinkles on her face, as some 36-year-old women do, is that right? I don't know. Which I think she would say, I swim every day in the cold North Sea. And whether she had grey hair, because she was walking under a painter's ladder when he was painting a gutter grey, I don't know. What I do know is that my father was born a month before they got married. There was the wrong way around. So whether my father had been born, he greeted cried all the time, I don't know, but it wasn't too long before Monty said, I'm getting out of here. He maybe, give him his due, he maybe said, I'm going to make a fortune. We're going to live happily ever after when I've made my fortune. But he went out to India 3 months after the wedding, and he stayed there on and off, because he had holidays, till 1931. Came back, didn't live too long after that, died of skin and bone cancer at age only 48. So that's how I've gone too far, sorry. That's how it was in 2007. Nothing happened, and then suddenly, almost 2 years later, I get 2 emails within a week. One from Aberdeen in Scotland, and the other from Seville in Spain, from a Scots chap that married a Spanish girl. And each one was much the same. Whoopee! We're related! And I'd never heard of them. They'd come down the daughter's side of Reverend Hugh. But they were related, and that was now a chance to go further with them and find out stories. And the one from Seville says, by the way, I've got the Reverend Hugh Fitzpatrick's Bible, and in the inside cover, guess what? The family tree's there, eh? Do you want to find it? Well, I'd done the perfect presentation. I didn't need to, but I thought, just out of politeness, yes, send it. So he sent it to me, and he showed me that my grandfather had been married to an Indian woman from Kalimpong. Really? And it showed me some of the details. There you are. See, this haunts me. Every time I put my computer on, this thing kind of zooms in. So it shows that he had this partner, and he had 3 children. If you haven't got good binoculars, here's what I really want to show. Yes, tea plant manager. He had lived in this bungalow. This is a big single-storied house with a veranda, a stoop, and corrugated iron roof to keep the tigers off jumping through the slates. And in the time he was out there, he, according to the family tree in the Bible, 3 children. Margaret, there was no clues. Helen said that she'd married and moved over to Brighton in England. And Colin, in the World War II, he'd been a captain with the famous Chindits, and he'd fought against the Japanese in Burma. But there was absolutely no mention of my granny Janet, Jessie, nor my daddy George. So something had gone wrong somewhere. Had we been expelled? There is a photograph of family as the only one I've got, and it came from, so, oh, sorry, I'm pressing on, but there, that's my father George. He's of the squint-tied group in the genealogy sense. I won't wear a tie so as I don't copy him. Here's his mother Jessie, and there's Monty. There's the one I'm talking about today. This is when he was home on leave in 1990, 7 years after he'd gone out, so George wouldn't have seen too much of him. So from there I went to the 2013 gathering in Kilkenny, and I spoke more about my Uncle Jimmy, because he had been in the war, First World War, and I had photographs of his medals, photographs of his tunics and his trousers and his hat when they'd come back from the dry cleaner. So I had another reasonable story, but I knew a bit more about Monty there that I briefly touched on, and that was to the extent that he worked for a company called James Finlay of Glasgow that had many tea plantations out in India. And they have donated a lot of their archival information, documents, to the Glasgow University archives. And amongst that was the performance appraisals of all the managers, assistant managers in the tea plantations out in India. So for 1912 to 1931, I could find out how he got on annually, his highs and his lows. And I could find out how he left when he was still in his 40s. Because he had a row. You know, it's another trait of the Fitzpatricks that side doesn't come to me. So there is the, page after page of how he performed. I was bitten by a dog. Even stuff like that gets into it. Nothing about his 3 children from this partner, right? It's just kept quiet, the personal stuff there. So I decided to do more research after 2013. Given what that was in the family tree, I was going to look for Margaret and Helen. But Margaret, no clues, no chance. All right, so I gave up that. Helen married in Brighton, England. In the 1930s, there was about 130,000 people in Brighton, and there quite a few would be married Helens. I hadn't a chance, I didn't know her last name. So I gave the girls up, and I went for Colin. Surely he'll be in the books. Many books have been written about the Chindits fighting in the Second World War. And I would get the library to get out. And I must have read about 10 of them looking for Captain Colin. Not a sign. So then I went to veterans associations, like the Old Comrades, the Burma Star and that, and no word of him there. And then I thought, maybe his surname wasn't Fitzpatrick. Maybe he'd taken the surname of his mother, who's Indian. So I thought, I'll get nowhere. I'll go on to the drawing board again and look for help. That woman from Aberdeen that had contacted me earlier about knowing things, I said, have you got any more evidence? Anything that will help me? And she says, actually, I had correspondence with a chap from Ireland back in the late 70s, early 80s. And it came from Bray, which is south of Dublin, and he says, I've got a letter still, and here is this letter today. So let's have a look at it. It says that he worked at Brook House School as a headmaster, and in the letter it says, I was also a headmaster in India. So I reckon that if he was a headmaster at both these places, he must have gone to school in the first place. Because you've got to be educated to get up to headmastership, haven't you? So he's talking about how he is. So I thought, I'm going to chase after this guy, because he might give me clues. Maybe clues about Monty that I didn't know about. So is he alive, or is he dead? Is he still in Ireland, or is he somewhere else? So that was my next start. My friend from Spain, you need 2 sometimes for lateral thinking to get going. So we thought, well, if this guy attended school, where would he have attended school? Yes, India. Would it be in the tea plantation areas? Yes, it was. And we looked up and we found Victoria Boys High School. And on the neck, they have quite a bit of information, including the headmaster's report in 1952. Typical headmaster. I addressed the school at 7 p.m. speaking to them about their behaviour and attitude towards their studies and games. We all get this sort of thing as we go through school, don't we? and also about their conduct in the dining hall dormitories. Next paragraph. As a letter written by C. MacDonald, narrowing it down now, warming up, to one of the girls in Dow Hill was found in Dow Hill. Wonder what it said. I had occasion to use the cane. It must have been an exciting letter. And the next paragraph, you believe me not, the nurse is now attending to outdoor patients in school. So was there a connection? Eh? My imagination goes a bit beyond that. Hey, so having got that, oh, and I'm stuck. Right, we'll try this one.
Battery's working?
On your computer, there's no...
Yeah.
All right. So now, being on the trail of Chris MacDonald, again using the web, I looked at old boys associations, and I wrote to the secretary in Australia, a couple in Britain, and so on, and I asked, "Do you remember Chris MacDonald? Do you know him? Do you know if he's where he is now?" And they all came back and said, "No, nice chap, but we don't know where he is. If you find out, let us know." So it was the wrong way around. So we then looked for any McDonald's that maybe lived in Kalimpong, which is where the partner had come from, if you remember that slide. And we had success, because in the back half of the 19th century, there was a David MacDonald out there that was a British trader. He was involved with the countries Bhutan, Sikkim, Nepal, Tibet. He was involved in trying to improve Britain's relationship with them, and also bartering for things that they may have that British museums would like. So he did quite well out there, and he built a big house. He built a big house, I presume, because although he was only 4'10" tall, he had 13 offspring. So you wonder why India's got such a big population. Eh?
Your relation.
Eh?
It's your relation.
Yeah. So we had success. We had a McDonald now that was in Kalimpong, and interesting enough, that hotel, the house that eventually we came to, called Himalayan Hotel, it was used by many of the climbers en route to Mount Everest. So Mallory and Irvine, British couple that in the 1920s almost got to the summit, or did they get to the summit, because on the last day they were seen no more. And interesting that the oldest son of this David MacDonald, John, he was in that team. He was in the group, mainly as a translator, but he was so fit that on the evening before the last walk up to the top, he was chosen to be one of the group. Unfortunately, or fortunately for him, he had a great liking for Irish malt whiskey, 85% proof. And he thought, I'll celebrate this. I'll have one, I'll have two, I'll have three. And he had so many that they couldn't awake him the next day. So Mallory and Irvine went off, he stayed sleeping, snoring, and he survived, and they didn't. So that's him. He's also supposed to have given rise to that limerick. There are several reasons for drinking, and one has just entered my head. If a man can't drink when he's living, how the heck can he drink when he's dead? So that's John MacDonald. So then we came to another breakthrough. There was a missionary school in Kalimpong that was started by a Scottish missionary in the 1890s, and Dr. John Graham's his name, and he was so worried that the number of orphan children, or children of British parentage or British fathers out there, they just walked off and left these children to do nothing. So we looked into that, and then I had this works again. I had a catalytic moment, if you like. There's a lady that lives not too far from us, and when we go out for a meal sometimes, she always keeps you going. She says, "And what have you been up to in this time? And have you any stories to tell?" So you've got to be prepared, you know. So I told her that I was doing a bit of family history, and that I was struggling a bit in getting any further in India. She says, "I was born in Calcutta." I says, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm looking more for higher up in Kalimpong." "My sister was born there." And my sister goes out there every 2 or 3 years because she sponsors a child at that school. So there I was now into a group of people that could help me go further. There is, on the right-hand side, Dr. Graham. I don't know when this was taken, but it could be that if Monty had children there, one of them was the children. If anybody in the back seat sees a commonality in the face, just let me know after. And there's the school. It has about 1,000 pupils now. It does very well. 800 boarders, and the rest are day. It was affected badly in 2012 with the earthquakes in Nepal, so a lot of the buildings got ruined at that time. So my question became, did Monty's children go to that school? And if so, did the school have any records still of him? And I asked 1 or 2 people, and they said, what? 90 years later, you want to know if paperwork still exists out in India? The Indian administrators don't keep paper that long. They smoke it. And then, if they do keep it, the humidity will rot it. And if the humidity doesn't rot it, there's white ants, I tell you, that size, he did that. It says they will eat it. They'll love to finish off their evening meal with paper. So, anyway, I wrote. And what do I get? I get 47 copies of letters. 47. They came back in good condition, still covered with. And this one relates to Helen, but all the others are there too. And it showed their births, their baptisms, their time they went to school, problems at school, what they were going to do in the future. A lot of good information from them. So here in sort of summary is what I'm up to now. It's clear that Monty arrived not long after his Scottish wedding in December 1912 in India. It didn't take him long to be bored, and he met, and in May 1914, less than 2 years later, Helen was born. She's the oldest, so it's the wrong way around. Margaret, Helen and Colin before, now it's Helen, Colin, Margaret. So she was born, and then 2 years later came along Colin, and then in 1919, it was the first time that Monty had gone back for a holiday of 6 months. You saw that photograph of him enjoying himself. And when he went back to India, was there not 1 month later another baby? He must have arrived at Bombay Airport stacked with nappies, baby powder, safety pins, toys. You can imagine him going through the airport to customs control. Unfortunately, not there. And anyway, somehow Janet's, his wife from Forfar in Scotland, she maybe got wind of it. She thought, I better go out and control this guy. He's getting a bit of a problem. So she went out in October 1920, and she stayed with him till the end of the contract, 31. But somehow she must have had her back turned at one stage, because in 1922 another one popped out, this time called Nora. But I would like to at least acknowledge that Monty tried his best for the children. Not many of the managers did that, but he did. And it helped him to get into a service job or a nursing job in the future. I should say, before I just leave that slide, that Helen was never in Brighton. She never left India at all. Colin, he was never a fighter. He never was in the war. So, you know, you've got to work these things out in a long fashion to know what the truth is. So, there's Helen now. She married another son of wee David MacDonald, and they had 3 children. Christopher, remember Chris MacDonald? Yeah. He lives here, but unfortunately he's not in good health, so we're not going to meet up this weekend. So, but he's here, and he's helped me in recent times. Tim, another son, he ran the Himalayan Hotel until 2 years ago when a big hotel corporation took over, and there's a Peter now lives in Birmingham. There is a baptism certificate of Helen, which has got some interest because you've got to give the parents' names, first name, surname. So with Monty, you don't see Hugh Montgomery or Monty, you see simply HM. Would that be His Majesty, maybe? I don't know. I don't know. But from the mother's name, first name, you can see it down the bottom, she has the name Jetty Tamang. That is a tribe name from Nepal. So she came from Nepal, not from India. So these clues straighten that one out for me. There's a picture of Helen and Christopher. That would be taken about 1939. And so I'm not going to say much about this one, but I think that what I should say is that I run a wee genealogy club, and I've got people to really talk to their aunts or sisters or people they haven't been really in communication with over the last few years, just Christmas cards. And they've managed to pick up a few things. And I got one that says, I don't know how to do this. I said, well, if somebody wanted to identify you in 100 years' time, what evidence is there that you ever existed? So, you know, things like house owner or hospital appointments or something like that. But you can get a lot still by questioning yourself. What would you be leaving behind for people? And remember, Google will be far better in 100 years' time. Or will it? So, remember my great-grandpa? Remember him with the crossed legs? He had a father, of course, and this father died when he was only 30, while his wife was pregnant with her second child. So maybe there's another story for me. Maybe there could be a fourth time, eh? And you've got to stop this. Stop me if you can. Is there anybody here that won't be speaking about their family next time? Anybody, put your hands up, you won't be speaking. That's a 7-day conference. But you can. Think about it, because there's some interest, and you may get one person in the hall says, I know. I mean, I had a young senator last time that knew my great-uncle, eh? So, finally, what happens during the weekend? Just for those that are new, you'll be taken to interesting places in the afternoon. You might be taken down deep down into relics there. Make sure that the guy knows how to get out. Eh? Take some breadcrumbs if you're at all doubtful. Eh? This group got out, fortunately. And they came home and they joined the Kilkenny Red Wine Drinking Society. Or the G&T Society. Eh? And there's an interesting photograph. You might be sitting next to somebody you don't know, say a local Irishman. I can tell you a story or two, he'll say. I can tell you where the family treasure is. It's actually in my back garden. If you get a spade and start digging, you'll find it. But look how really closely listen to the chap, Tony. There's the young and the old. Where is he? He's at the back end. I've seen about 6 photographs of that this season. And we must have been like paparazzis. We must have been pushing each other out with our cameras to try and get the photograph. You're going to hear from Ryan later today. There's a group again in that same place in 2013. The trouble this time was we were waiting for the police to come. Somebody had broken their leg. Somebody had legged it, would you believe? And then you're going to be well looked after by the MC for the weekend. Eh? Just don't get him to sing Danny Boy, eh? Because if he sings Danny Boy in the evening, you'll get it on the bus the next day. So anyway, he'll keep in charge of you. So enjoy the experience. It'll be a good weekend. Thanks.
Bravo!
Another question for Brian.
But my dad did it one time. Oh, he did. Yeah.
I love the way he's encouraged you all to start putting your stories together. And nobody said I won't be here next time, so it looks like we're going to have, as he says, a 7-day conference. Can I, where's the list for the food? Does it come back here?
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's gone back that way.
It's gone over there.
Okay, it's down here. Okay, okay. I want to get that back if I can, please. Can I just make a point while Ryan is here? Can I make a point about, I was talking to Patrick, I think it was, yesterday, wasn't it? About, we all say that when I was younger, I never asked Aunt so-and-so, or Uncle so-and-so, or Granddad so-and-so to tell me the stories. So there's great learning in that. We're all now the uncle so-and-so, or the grandma so-and-so, or the granddad so-and-so. So the responsibility is really on us now to start telling the children, the younger ones, what we know, right? And getting them to write it down or writing it down for them or whatever the case may be. But we need to send the information back, if you like, or down to the next generations, rather than in a couple of years them saying they never told us. This life is not secure. I think, Brian, you'd agree with that. There's nothing secure here at all. Okay. I'm being called, I'm being summoned.
Yeah, that definitely. I know we have.
That's tomorrow. Oh, no, that's today. Well, that was, I have no compare that. You see, 10 around the practice.
Yeah, did you get that over here, or somebody
No,
else
That's
did?
later.
like, actually,
That
my
came
brother
last
got
week.
it probably 20 years ago, and about 4 years ago, he lost weight. So I took it.
Well, you'll remember your brother forever.
Yeah.
Did you get that?
Yeah.
And she's great. Tremendous. She wants to sound
Well, my brother came over here, probably, gosh, it's been a long time. I think it was like for his 50th birthday, so he brought back a shot glass from Wales. He's very much going to trade on glass.
Yeah.
I used the metal one.
Well, how old are you? 74. You don't look 74.
Oh, well, thank you. I feel that way.
Can only imagine. At home, they have they drive a F-150.
Is it RT?
So here, drive it, even though it's a BMW, it's a little car. And I'm sitting in and pulling one leg over the steering wheel at a time, trying to fit in there.
Is it a diesel?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was kind of surprised. The
Making noise.
Oh, yeah.
That's okay. Was that on TV?
Because if you get to a light and you're sitting there for more than about 3 seconds,
I go on all kind of dates.
car shuts off, and then it starts and put up. I don't like it. I'm used to it now, but just because there's no other way to do it. But it's very strange.
I have driven pickups, and I have one. I really like to set up time.
Yeah, exactly.
The car's nameless. I don't like it. But anyway, the diesel thing is shutting off.
Yeah, you know,
I drove a pickup.
And
About
I
15 years ago, so we've had that technology been around for quite a while. But I just wondered about the long-term starting a lot.
It's doing
It's gotta be a
the drain on the batteries
starter.
from the starter.
Yeah, it's gotta be. Yeah, I love driving. I've always had one all my life.
It is.
Yeah.
It would be pretty much hard to come here and I haven't gotten
Over here, holy smoke, this is
gas.
Yeah.
On these little roads.
Yeah.
All these buses seem to get around pretty good.
Yeah. Dude,
I watched them pass where we've been on it.
semis, all of it.
It's been such
I think, how can anybody fit? They
do.
do.
It's funny, once the beers are separated.
Good morning.
They go.
God.
Could 3 of us buy a little
We've been on the bus for 30 days now. We've had some really good
You're
stuff.
That's good.
They will have it in and out of the office. But if you notice, if you got the double back, whatever will turn.
Everybody is,
Yes.
are there some who aren't having the dinner or the lunch? There's some who aren't having the lunch, okay? So that's fair enough, yeah, okay. So this is what it is. And those who are having the lunch, you go into the main dining room where you were this morning, and it'll be there for you, okay? So I give them that later on.
Because I was asking when the bus drivers.
So now,
And I said,
yes, our next speaker is
"Oh, yeah, I'll eat for it."
Ryan. You all know Ryan from the list. And Ryan is going to talk to us about the Fitzpatrick's event.
He said it'll really
Yeah,
get
so,
you.
where you go?
Hi, Ryan.
It's Mr. Owen Ryan Fitzpatrick. How are you? You might know me as Eugene. If you see me on Facebook, I'm Eugene Fitzpatrick. I'm posting on the Facebook groups. There are a couple of them. I can talk about the Facebook groups later. But just to clear up any confusion, I'm Ryan Fitzpatrick. That's what everybody calls me. But technically, my real first name is Eugene. As was my father's, he's Eugene Sean. As was my grandfather's, he's Eugene Vincent. My son is Eugene Kieran. So we have a line of Eugenes, and it makes everything on our medical records very confusing when something comes in the mail for Eugene Fitzpatrick. But just to let you guys can all call me Ryan. That's what everyone else in the world calls me. So welcome. Thank you for coming. And can I just ask for a warm round of applause for Ronan for organizing it? Much and we can't clap enough for him. But back to me, back to my family. Today I'm talking about the Fitzpatricks of Manhattan, and I want to just stress that there were many Fitzpatricks in Manhattan. I'm well aware of this. This is just about my particular Fitzpatricks, but I call them the Fitzpatricks of Manhattan because my great-great-grandfather had achieved a level of social success, economic success, and he was prominent during his day. None of my family live there currently. None of my family, most of my family actually, have moved away from the lower New York City area. Only my parents, my siblings that reside with them, and my aunt. I have one aunt who lives still in the New York City metro area, but everyone else in the family has scattered across the East Coast, mainly to warmer climates, and one to Australia. So we really aren't around the New York area anymore. I live north of the city. I come down to the city every now and again, and I drive past it to go home to Long Island, where the rest of my kids are. And speaking of my kids, just one more round of applause. My long-suffering wife is in the back, Melissa. Can I get a round of applause for her? I don't know what type of pain I've put her through. I can't get into her shoes, but she's endured all of my obsession for years, and I just want to thank her for especially her allowing me to do all this work that's led up to the gathering. So she's got our youngest daughter, Eileen, with us right now, and my 3 other children are with my parents on Long Island being babysat so that we could attend. So I'm very happy that we could do this. Okay, so this photo right here is the last known family photo of my great-great-grandfather and his family taken together before tragedy struck. I believe this to be Christmas time, 1905, and this was taken in the family living room at 552 West 162nd Street in Washington Heights, which is where my forebears resided towards the end of my great-grandfather's life. He had lived in the Lower West Side when he was young. It was a poor Irish community. He lived on West 43rd Street, and it was working class Roman Catholic. So that was the milieu which he comes from, but he eventually acquired enough money to get a better apartment, moved to the Upper West Side, in a sort of a posher environment, and he liked to flaunt it. So we'll get into him a little bit. But this was the last photo that I've seen of the family together, and it's the only photo, I think, that has all of them that I've seen. So just to point out who's who, this right here, we'll get into him in a little bit. This is my double great-great-grandfather, James Fitzpatrick. This is his wife, Bridget Murray. She was also, both of them were born in Ireland. And these are their 5 children that made it to adulthood. As I was going through the records, I was able to see getting a little insight into their family history. In the 1870 census and in the 1880 census, a very unusual question was asked on the U.S. federal census. It asked, how many children do you have, how many children have you had, and how many children are living? So those 2 questions. And most answers along the whole list of any page of census will give us sort of a lowball number of 3, 4, 5. But Bridget Murray, who I believe was probably at the door when the census taker comes around, during the middle of the day, no one else is home. She's the lady of the house is home. He knocks on the door, and she's most likely the one that's going to be giving the answers. She had a very high number. In one of the censuses, she wrote 12. I had 12 children. In another census, she wrote 14. Right? Right, but 5 living. So that's a very painful question. And I can only imagine, as any good Roman Catholic, she's probably counting in that number. Why such an unusually high number? Why 12? Why 14? She's probably counting miscarriages, stillbirths, and any sort of death in childhood. And for the longest time, I did not know, I didn't have any records of any kind of children that may have died, so I was just assuming it was all stillbirths or miscarriages, but I found out later on that that wasn't the case, so we'll get into that. So here we have my great-great-grandfather, James, and his son, his eldest surviving son, James Joseph. Okay, so James, and then James Joseph, his wife, Bridget Murray, and then in the birth order it goes Rosalie, Maria, or Marie, Florence, or Flory, and then James Joseph, and then last, Harry. And we'll talk about Harry. Harry threw me for a loop. He confused me for a little bit. But this is all them when they were in adulthood, and the very next year, Flory was taken. She was killed by consumption. So she was, I think, 26 at the time, in the prime of her life, and I can imagine that that was probably a large blow to the family. I also have their burial records, and I know that when my great-great-grandfather bought a plot of land in which to bury himself and his wife, it turns out that the first Fitzpatrick he had to put in the grave was his youngest daughter. So that must have been very heart-wrenching. And they're all in that same plot now. I'll also talk about who else is in that plot. I've had a totally unrelated family in our burial plot. So we'll get to that. Yeah, well, I hope not a victim, because it's a whole family. But anyway, so the main thrust, it's all about this guy here. This is my earliest known relative that I can say with certainty I know who he is. This is James Fitzpatrick, no middle name given. He was born in 1838. In fact, his New York City death certificate states that he was born in February of 1838, and that's the closest I can get to a birthday for him. Although it only says that he was born in Ireland, and that seems to be a recurring theme with him. Every time I find documentation about where he was from in Ireland, it just says Ireland. It's very broad and general. We have a family tradition that we come from Dublin, but I have not seen that on paper. So I only have that just from knowing our oral tradition, which I'll talk about, and also second too, because some of our oral tradition has been overturned, or it looks like it might. And we don't really know, or I haven't been able to conclusively define what year he came to America. Records indicate that he came in 1848 or 1855. Now, if he was born in 1838, that means that he would have been 9 or 10 if he arrived in 1848. It's very young to have arrived, and would have necessitated, usually, family. It would have required him to come with other adult members, because you can't imagine a 9-year-old arriving after crossing the Atlantic alone and then thriving in New York City. It's, having a life trajectory at that age all by yourself is highly unlikely. But he could have also arrived in 1855. That would have put him in his mid-teens. So perhaps. More indication, more evidence leans towards the 1848 date. And whereas I've always wanted to put more weight on the 1855 date because things made more sense for our family oral tradition, it seems now, with the documents that I have, that 1848 is probably the more accurate. However, if that is the case, that seems to change a lot of things, so we'll talk about that. All right, so what is our family oral tradition? I've always heard it said, from when I was young till now, the people in my family have always told me that James came from Dublin, and that his family in Dublin owned a bouterie. I'd like to say shoe store or maybe shoe factory, but the word that's always been used is bouterie. And I've actually looked this up, and I've found evidence, records of a Fitzpatrick bouterie in Dublin at the right time, although none of the names seem to match up, but there certainly was a Fitzpatrick bouterie in Dublin during his early years. So it's corroborable. It's perhaps that was the one. Somewhere around St. Stephen's Green is actually where the location used to be. He left Ireland, according to the lore of our family, he left Ireland as a young man alone, that he came by himself as a very young man. That's how I've heard it said. But there was some issue. He wasn't going to inherit anything somehow. He either wasn't going to have a hand in this bootery or he wasn't going to receive a portion of it. We don't know if there was an older brother or an older sibling. We don't know if there was a death in the family. We hear nothing of his father, just that at some point he wasn't going to have an inheritance, so he strikes out for America to make his way in the world. And this is the image I've had of him, is this intrepid young man who is going out to seek his fortune. He arrives in New York City, and all of my known Fitzpatrick relatives come from him. We don't have any living family members that we're aware of that come from any siblings of his, either brothers or sisters or uncles or anyone else. All of our known relations come from him. So he is sort of the paterfamilias, the archetypical ancestor that we all look to. And right now we're split into two groups. And I'll get more into that later, but we have the Fitzpatricks of Alabama and Fitzpatricks of the rest of the East Coast. I'll tell you about it. There is a story floating around half of my family members that he possibly struck gold in the California gold rush. If he arrived in 1848 or even 1855, he still would have been in time to have hit that, although he would have had to have not just arrived in New York, but have been gone to the West Coast, which is a whole other trip unto itself. There are some people who swear by the story that they have heard this. There are others who have not heard it. So our own family is not in agreement whether this is actually the case. But if it is, it would make for a remarkable detail. I have found corroborating evidence that there was a passenger on a ship bound from New York City in 1856 down to Nicaragua, and his name was J. Fitzpatrick. And out of all of the passengers that sat on this line from New York City to Nicaragua, he's the only Fitzpatrick. Sorry, one of two Fitzpatrick, but he's the only J. Fitzpatrick. The other one was an Edward Fitzpatrick, full name given. But a J is still inconclusive. It's not necessarily a James. It could be a John, it could be a Jeremiah, it could be anybody. But why Nicaragua? Well, during that year, 1856, I believe, a rail line had opened up connecting both sides, Atlantic and Pacific. And it was a cheap way for people on the east coast of North America to get to the Pacific Ocean, whereby they would take a steamship up to San Francisco and they could participate in the gold rush or any kind of settlement going out there. So it was a very fast way. The story goes is that he struck gold because he had enough money early on in his career to have 3 businesses going at the same time, one of which he inherited, but the other 2 he was working in, and we don't know really how he got the capital, the startup capital to do this. So the 3 businesses were a feed store, because remember, New York City in those days was full of horses. It was full of people, but there were no cars. So if you wanted to get around, you had to have a horse. And all of those horses required a lot of grass, but grass is in short supply in New York City. So a feed store for horses was a very profitable business. And connected to that was his second business, a livery business, which is just the trappings and other accoutrements that a horse might need, and those things wear out. So he had a location where he could wheel and deal in both of those. When he married Bridget Murray, probably sometime after 1862, I haven't found a marriage record for them, surprisingly, in New York City, but I believe it's probably after his naturalization, which occurs in 1862. He acquires, and legend has it or story has it, from his father-in-law, a paving business. So back in the day, transatlantic ships coming from Europe would be full of cargo and people, and they would need to be balanced. So there would be in the hull of the ship ballast stones, large stones that would simply be put down in the hull to weigh the ship down, keep the keel straight. And when everyone got across the Atlantic and all the people got off and all the goods were unloaded, you didn't need those ballast stones to weigh down the ship. So you could have a ladder cross back, take whoever was going to go back to Europe, but it wouldn't be nearly as many people. And you could dump all those stones somewhere and then fly back to Britain or Ireland. And he would take these stones and he would pave certain sections of New York City. And we have his business journal. My father's cousin Raymond has his journal, and it has listed in it all the different streets in New York City that he paved. So during the time that he was operating that paving business, we actually have a record of what sections of Manhattan his company was laying down stone. And sometimes you can still go to Manhattan today, and you can see areas that have not been covered in asphalt. And I've always wanted to go down and maybe grab a block, but I haven't yet done that. I haven't actually taken a crowbar to some of the streets of Manhattan and pulled out a stone. but I might do that. So if you see a pothole somewhere, you might think of me. So he marries Bridget Murray, and he has 6 children. You saw 5 in the photograph, but I did find records of 1 who did not make it to adulthood, but it was certainly recorded. So he had at least 6 children that made it past infancy. He was a strict teetotaler. He did not take any alcohol of any kind, which I thought was highly unusual for an Irish Catholic living in New York City during those days, but he was adamant. And his children reacted to that in different ways. His 2 eldest daughters were in lockstep with him and also didn't touch the drink. But his 2 sons bucked the trend, and they were party boys, and we'll talk about them also. But he was known to have shunned alcohol enough that when he achieved, I guess, more wealthy social circles, he stopped, apparently, according to tradition, he stopped socializing with the Vanderbilts when he found out that they took alcohol on Sundays. It's very unusual, right? I can't explain it, but that was the tradition that's been handed to us. He also had a seat on the Corn Exchange Bank, which is sort of like a commodities exchange. It was a bank. I don't know too much about it, but we have records and letters that he was a shareholder or a stockholder, so he had some position and influence there. And from the photographs that I have, I can take a look at the man's hands. He had working hands. And I always pay attention to a man's hands and what he can do with them. So I recognize that he was a very hardworking individual who wasn't afraid of labor, wasn't afraid of getting his hands dirty, but it made him successful. And so you'll see that in the photographs. You'll see images of him standing next to his businesses, which kind of look down like in, lower west side of Manhattan. But at the same time, he's also very fond of wearing fine clothes. We have a lot of his furniture. My grandmother has some of his furniture. So we can see that he also appreciated the finer things in life. And so he was able to move between many levels of society. He was very proud of his Irish heritage. We have some of his accoutrements, too, that indicate that he cherished dearly his Irish identity in New York, and that was very important. And we also know from different things that we have that his children did the same. So they were very proud to be Irish. But this is the oral tradition. And as I began to do more research on him, I found that not everything that I heard makes sense in light of the records. And I'm one to trust oral tradition, because this is the story that's been passed down. So I don't think that people were just making things up. And there are corroborating details of it, but we'll talk about why some of this might not make sense. Okay, so what's the documentary evidence? I have a master's degree in history. Really what matters is not just the story or the hearsay, it's what you can prove on paper. So that's what you have to go on. So again, he had either an 1848 or an 1855 arrival. I won't take you through every single document because that would be tedious. However, right now, we have documents that seem to indicate that 1848 was the more likely event, the more likely arrival. There are documents that indicate the year 1855 for his arrival, so I don't know where that number comes from, but it seems right now that there's one document in particular, which we'll talk about, which kind of throws in the 1848 favor. Documents indicate that he may have had family, which is remarkable because we have no idea who these people are, we have no burial records for them, we have no living descendants that come from them, we have no memory of these people, and yet on his naturalization record, his paper is co-signed or sponsored by a man named Edward Fitzpatrick. And it even says that Edward and James are living together at a certain address and that they are boiler makers. I guess whatever that means, they made boilers, which is a trade that I did not know he knew how to do. We don't have any records from that. We don't have a family memory that he was a boiler maker, but we're certain that we have the right naturalization record because we didn't find this naturalization record in an archive somewhere. Our family possesses the original document. So being that we have the original document, it's undoubtedly the correct James, but who is this Edward on the paper? We don't know. We don't know. And Edward Fitzpatrick, like James Fitzpatrick, is a very common name in New York City during that time. We also have an 1851 certificate of First Communion for Roman Catholic Church. So if he was born in 1838, 1851, he would have been about 13 years old. It kind of makes sense for a Roman Catholic First Communion. However, I don't know who was giving out communion certificates. I mean, maybe they were doing that in Ireland, but they probably were doing it in New York. In Ireland at the time, the majority of the people were Catholic. And so being Catholic, being Roman Catholic wouldn't have been so remarkable. But in New York City, it was much more of an identity, and there was a lot of competition to, I guess, affirm that. And I think that a communion certificate or a certificate of First Communion would be more plausible in an American context. Also, the way the date is written, and I'll show you this document up close, it's written in the American style. So I believe that this is an American document. And if he was in America in 1851, he couldn't possibly have arrived in America in 1855. We also have his 1862 naturalization document, which I mentioned, which also mentions his, which mentions a co-sponsor, Edward. We have his business journal, and we have other things. We also know that he had exquisite penmanship, that he was a very, very good writer. So that implies some level of schooling, which also indicates that he probably didn't come, if he came in 1848, probably not alone. Because if you're going to come alone, you're going to wind up in a poorhouse or an orphanage or on the street somewhere, and you're not going to have access to the type of education that's going to give you good handwriting. We know that he had very good handwriting, so at some point in his early life, he probably had somewhat of an education. And the most important document of all that I think is his New York City death certificate. He died in 1927. And the death certificate is the only document that names his parents. So I know his parents' names. This document probably would have been filled out by his eldest daughter, because his wife had predeceased him by that point, so his eldest daughter is the one who signed it, so she's probably the one giving the information. And on it, it lists a Thomas Fitzpatrick and a Margaret Delahanty. So Thomas Fitzpatrick is my thrice great-grandfather, according to this document, and his wife, Margaret Delahanty. I have searched Irish records that are available on Ancestry. I have searched records on the National Library of Ireland, searched records all over. I have yet to find any corroborating marriage certificate or baptismal record that mentions a Thomas Fitzpatrick married to a Margaret Delahanty, although I have found one that says a Thomas Fitzpatrick and an M. Fitzpatrick, not Delahanty, but M. Fitzpatrick, with a child, James, in the Dalkey area. Now, we have this family tradition that he comes from Dublin, but that could be maybe County Dublin, maybe not the city, but it's probably the city. So I'm really not sure where to go past the water. After emigration, I lose track of my ancestors, and I really don't know where to go from here. But let me take you through some certificates and his children. So this is known as Father's Communion Paper. This is what his eldest daughter, Rosalie, has handed to us, and now it sits with my cousin Raymond's house. It's probably hard for you guys to see, but it says James Fitzpatrick, or Jas, J-A-S is the most common way to abbreviate James in those days. James Fitzpatrick, and the document is torn. So there's a key piece of information that's missing here, but very faintly, it says Church of St. Columba, and then the document rips. I believe it's St. Columba. And there was on the Lower West Side, and there still is today, a church in Manhattan called the Church of St. Columba, which is most likely where this document comes from. But I've contacted that church, and they don't keep records that far back, so they really couldn't corroborate anything for me. I have not found any records of a Dublin church by the name of St. Columba for those dates. But the date is written in the American style, and I don't know if that type of style was used in Ireland or if it's the current style. So, in America, we'll say the 25th of March, right, and then the year. But today in Ireland, it would be March 25th, right? So there's a reversal of the date, of the month and the day. And this is in the American style, which kind of leads me to think that this is most likely an American document. And if this is true, if this is an American document, if it's not an Irish document, then at least we can eliminate 1855 as his arrival date, which then changes his whole story. Probably. Okay, so here he is. Here's the man himself, standing. You can see Fitzpatrick's. This is in front of his store with some of his workers. He was a tall, slender man. He always had a big mustache in every photo I've seen him. He was very fond of bowler hats. They were popular in the day. But you can see the type of work it was. You're working with horses, you're working with hay feed, so it's down and dirty work, but it's good work. And there's a glare on this photo here, but this is from my aunt. Here's another shot of it. There's Fitzpatrick's. This store no longer exists as a storefront. I think it's been totally bulldozed and razed. New York City has also gone through address renumbering, so you can't even look up the original address. We have the numbers, but it doesn't corroborate with any known address today in Lower Manhattan. Lower Manhattan has received a lot of change over the years. But this is him, again, in his work apron, and this is him later on in life. There's that hat. There's that nice bowler hat, holding his glasses, looking very dandy. We also have evidence of his businesses. So this would be a receipt. If you were going to exchange or do any kind of transaction, he probably would have given you a receipt. And it's just great to have these type of documents in our family because it gives insight. When I think about all the different things that he lived through, being born in 1838 and dying in 1927, anyone who lived through that period, especially if they went first from Europe and then to America, so many great events that passed, right? You have the potato famine, you have an emigration, a wave, where many people are coming to New York. You have various wars, including World War I, which was very large and consumed both sides of the Atlantic. You have in America the epidemic of Spanish flu, which killed something like 20 million people in America. So you have all these different things. So I also, yeah, he was also one of the first people to have a telephone, right? And this was an unexpected document. I found his phone number, and it was 229. So not many phones in New York City at the time.
It's on the previous billhead.
Yeah. Oh, was it? Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
That's right.
yeah, telephone
Call.
Yeah, this is, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
In the 1890s.
He had one not only at late 1880s. He had one for his business, and this is also probably him as well, for another office, or maybe not. I'm not quite sure, but it's a
Residence and business.
Right. Yeah, he had one, possibly the next, but that is certainly his address for his business. So here we have, again, this is him at the end of his life, and I mentioned that there was another family buried in his tombstone, in his gravesite. There was a whole family, when I contacted Calvary Cemetery in Queens, I found out that there was a whole other family buried underneath our family, that they were the first ones actually to hit the grave plot. Their last name was Coggy, and apparently they were poor Irish, working class Irish, that he allowed to be buried in his plot. Family tradition says that this was actually, the guy was a policeman. I questioned my grandma about this, and she goes, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, he was a policeman. So whoever the Coggies were, their names are listed in Calvary Cemetery, but they're the first ones that actually get into our family plot, and the Fitzpatricks pile up on top of it. Yeah. Okay, so real fast, because just in the interest of time, I'll just take you through his children, because his children are very interesting, so if you would permit me. So his first son was Henry E. Fitzpatrick. We only have one document that relates to him. He was only found on the 1870 census, and this is interesting because we know that James's father was Thomas from the New York City death certificate. We also know that his wife, Bridget Mary, her father was also named Thomas. So that they would name the first son Henry, to me, is remarkable. That he wasn't named after the father's father, because there's a naming tradition in Irish families, and it wasn't adhered to. So we don't know who this Henry E. is named after, but he's the eldest child, and he was 4 in 1870, but we find no records of him after that. We have no photos, we have no descendants from him. So Henry seems to have died very young. And there's some later on confusion with Harry, because the last son that James had was called Harry. But this was not him, this is Henry E. So I believe he probably died around 1871. Then there's the oldest girl, who was for most of her childhood and into her adult life, the oldest child, Rosalie. Her name was Rosella, but she goes by Riz, she goes by Rosalie. She happened to be a very close friend of the American modernist Alfred Moore. He's the father of American Impressionism, he's a modernist painter. He went from realism into Fauvism into Cubism. He's a very famous painter today, but they were best friends growing up, and she appears in a number of his paintings. Alfred Moore nicknamed her either Riz or Peaches. He called her both things, and if you ever find an Alfred Moore painting that has a peach on the frame, he would carve peaches out of gesso, and he would give them to her. And we used to have, in our family possession, we used to have a number of his paintings, which during the time that we had them, they were considered hideous. He was not a valued artist. They're now valued millions and millions of dollars. We only have a few left, but we've unfortunately gotten rid of, through various means, most of his paintings. But she was always known as tall, very sober like her father, unwed for her whole life, and she was the matriarch. After James died, she received everything and doled it out to the rest of the family as needed because she was the responsible one. So here she is. This is a self-portrait of Alfred Moore as a young man in 1902, and this is my great-great-aunt, Rosalie, and the title of the painting is Woman in Pink, a Portrait of Roselle Fitzpatrick. That's the name of the painting. I believe this is in a private collection now. Some of these are scattered throughout museums in North America, but I'd one day always like to try to save up and reacquire them. Melissa's shaking her head, no, that's not going to happen. Okay, this is a picture of Alfred Moore as an old man. This is another painting of her, at the same time, figure of a woman. Our family tradition concerns him as well, too. We know that he had a liking for her for his entire life, but he may have had all sorts of likings for lots of people throughout his life. However, at the end of his life, when he resides in New York City, his father, who was also an artist but never approved of his paintings, died. And they died in enmity with each other. In fact, Alfred Moore lived upstairs in his own attic, apart from his father, and they never spoke. And his father lived to the age 100. And when his father died, they did not reconcile. Alfred, according to family tradition, proposed marriage to Rosalie, saying, "Hey, will you marry me?" And Rosalie said, "Alfie, I love you, but I'm not in love with you. Plus, you know, we're 60 years old at this point, it's not going to work." Whereupon he hangs himself over one of her portraits in his the back of the door in his attic. And supposedly he put a portrait of her on the ground and then hung himself. And that's how he died. And for the rest of her days, she always remembered poor old Alfie. And she acquired lots of his paintings over the course of his life. She eventually, Rosalie, came to live with my grandparents. And so many of those paintings were with my grandparents. And my grandmother thought they were hideous because he went into Fauvism and Cubism. And if you look at them, they are kind of hideous. I mean, she had good taste. So, but now they're worth lots of money. We no longer have those paintings, unfortunately. Here's a photograph from his studio. And here's another painting, a portrait of Rosalie Fitzpatrick, Riz. And she was probably also the model for several other paintings that don't bear her name. This is something called The Model. This is a young woman in a kimono. And there's others too, but I'm not quite sure. So they don't bear her name, but some of them actually do bear her name, which is nice. Then we have Maria Fitzpatrick. She is sort of quiet. She is known as the lifelong partner in crime with her older sister Rosalie, but she never married, and the two of them would have a jolly good time into adulthood, but no descendants and no epic stories that have come down to me about her. And then Florrie, young, beautiful, unfortunately died in the prime of her life from consumption, and again, therefore no descendants, no stories about her, because she only lived till 1906. And now we come to James Joseph. This is my great-grandfather. He's the only one of his siblings that went on to have any children. So our entire families, all of us, have him to thank. He did not marry until he was 40 years old. And when he did, he married someone who was 20 years his junior. He married a young model, Margaret McGuire, and very quickly had 4 children. And James was very fond of drinking. We do have a story, however, that when he was 16, he had a relationship with one of the housemates in the house, and she became pregnant. And this was quite scandalous in those days, especially to somebody who wanted to protect her reputation. So she was summarily, quickly dismissed, and he was sent to boarding school at age 16. And we don't know whatever happened to that child that was born. We don't know if it was a boy or a girl. We don't even know the housemate's name. Unfortunately, we just don't have any records of that. But there is somewhere in our family, people talk about it, but I have not seen it, a picture of everyone lining up next to a boat. They're probably going to go on a vacation, or they're maybe returning from a vacation. And everyone in the family is there, and there's a small boy. And no one knows who this boy is, but it's rumored, or it's thought, that he might be the young child that may have come from that relationship. But we just don't know. We don't know. So I'm hoping with the Y chromosome test that something would work out. And so, just to wrap things up, here he is, by the way, from boarding school. Yeah, looking like he's up to no good. Last guy, Thomas Harry Fitzpatrick. Okay, so when I said that there was confusion between Henry and Harry, the youngest boy was known as Harry. And we call him Harry, and when we talk about him, it was always Harry. I was very surprised to learn when I was looking up documents that his name is really Thomas. That he's named after one of his grandfathers, because they were both named Thomas. So where he got this name Harry from, we don't know. But this was confusing, because remember, there was a young son named Henry, and Harry, that's the connection of names. Like his brother, both boys were very fond of polo, and according to tradition, poor Harry was kicked in the head at some point by a horse, and he was never quite the same. And so he spends the rest of his days living out in an asylum in Brooklyn. But again, no descendants from him. So, and from James, we have these fine Fitzpatricks. We have James Joseph Jr., Raymond Paul, Florence, named after the aunt that died. We call her Toby, and this is my grandfather, Eugene Hinson. And so our two families descend from him and from him. So we have a group of Fitzpatricks mainly based in Alabama and Florida, and you have a recurring name. So Raymond was Raymond Sr. and he had a son named Eugene, and I had a son named Eugene. So the Raymonds and the Eugenes are flowing down, and we also have the name James flowing down in our family as well. Names that are both most common. In the interest of time, I'll wrap it up. I'll end it here. This is me standing in front of his house. I had the opportunity to go down to Manhattan for work a few months ago, and so I took the time to go to his old address. It's still there. I was able to take pictures. It's all locked up. Of course, someone lives there. But I'm going to wrap it up and end it there. And does anyone have any questions about anything? No? No? Okay. Thank you.
To have a child that had the communion at age 13.
Yes. Right, first communion. I mean, wouldn't it be around 7?
Yes.
Wouldn't it be age 7, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one more piece of information where, you know, if he was having first communion at 13, why wasn't he having communion somewhere else? So it occurred to me, maybe he was having communion in Ireland as younger, and then he had come over, and they just wanted to affirm this by giving him a certificate. I'm not quite sure, but it's dated 1851, so that's very unusual. I can't make much sense of it more than that. Yeah.
But I say, my knowledge is that children were usually had their communion at 13 to 50, 60 years ago. But the church decided then to bring the age down, kind of lock them in at an earlier stage. Maybe 80 or 90 years ago that change came.
Okay.
But my understanding was it wasn't always 7 years of age.
Okay, so it's more plausible than you think for an older time period, 13. Okay, I've never heard that. Thank you.
Can I add something to it? For quite some time, Steve and I have been aware of a guy named Harry Fitzpatrick who went to Australia. And we knew nothing about him. And recently we've discovered that Harry is not Harry at all. His name is Harry, right? And you begin to say to yourself, well, how would it be Harry? It's just one character, one letter is different, right? Harry. And it appears that Harry is actually an abbreviation for Herman. And instantly, the whole thing fits. We know exactly who he is, right? But we didn't know anything about him, and we just said, the paper said he went to Australia. And now we have found the entire family in Australia. It wasn't Harry at all, it was Harry. Right? So you were talking about Harry there over and over and over again. Curious to know how that name came into the family. It could be just a nickname for something else.
Yeah,
yeah.
Could
be a nickname.
Yep.
Brian, another possibility is that if he came when 51, he'd be how old when or 48 when he came?
You'd have been about 9 or 10.
Well, it could have been, he came for a reason. His parents could have died or something.
Yeah.
Well, I'm saying that might have disrupted the whole communion process with the family being farmed out or maybe going to Liverpool. And so when he came, finally, after he settled in, he got someplace to live. They said, oh, we haven't had your communion yet, you know, something like that.
Right.
A disruption.
Right.
You know.
My cousin Raymond has actually found a record of a Margaret Fitzpatrick, that's the mother's name, and a James and an Edward and a whole slew of sisters coming together on a boat around that time.
Yeah.
We think that might be it. We're not
Yeah,
sure. So
okay.
yeah. So, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Tea and biscuits just outside here, everyone. Around the perimeter there is the little exhibition that we have. The 35-foot scroll, the 33-foot scroll that we have is over there, and you can see where people are signing it, and hopefully we'll be able to take it to other parts of the world in the future and get other people who are saying to sign as well. So you have a look at all of that. And when you're coming next year, we want you to bring one of them. Oh.
Now I would grab it. Are you going to see that?
How are you, lad?
the invitation. I got unanimous prayers through the synagogue, through the Queen's Committee. I think it's terrific. Didn't I get to read it? I think it's wrong. I read it. And I think there's people who withdraw by buying our tickets and stuff. It's just disgusting. There's a missing link. Because we are connected with something. And so are you. Well, family tradition. No, not at all. Family tradition. And my grandfather in their money close and happy. And they passed their husbands and married. When the two years oh no, sorry. No, my cousins in Maribor, yes. My mother's cousin. I ran down and said, I don't know how to describe it. Those old things, I thought they were skim his necklace. I just put them in the bin and went out and Well, a close relative anyway. Now tell me, two ladies who mentioned, I always heard that there were two Fitzpatrick sisters who walked up to the lady and talked, and they were charging money, but they walked up to the work. Isn't that
Yeah, I suppose I went here. I went there yesterday.
Well, I was told that there were two sisters, and when he when parents died, he was small children, and they adopted him. And even though the people they brought up from health because they knew that his parents were watching. I heard it. So it's lovely to see you at this. How nice to meet you. Yes, I was. I laid down.
Find anything to make the tart.
Yeah, I slept like 6 hours. I need I'll just make one more contact with her just to make sure. Because I had to in Indiana, and my father, they zero. That's a bullseye. Okay. Bullseye. They didn't know. So this may probably do it. But their grandparents, my great-grandparents, and so they had never been to his family, and I had been like, but you know, my father, I knew DNA. But they would buy some. But I would talk about not a thing. And I said, I know what I are. And these probably yeah. He had a great time. You could care less about family. He's got ours, it's all about him. Yeah. Yeah, it's
oh yeah, she's definitely if I can get contact on my line, and then sometimes you find a name and you know there's somebody else who's different. And you go back and try to find what I was about to say, that's a problem that you have when you get to a point and you take over your birthday. That's what she's dealing with too. And she's in New York Fitzpatrick, she's not in that other New York Fitzpatrick. So it makes a difference. But the bugs, the mosquitoes, and the gnats, that don't die, and the mosquitoes don't bother me that much. They don't like my deposit blood as well as they like mold. They love mold, and most of my husband is one of my kids. I'm like, no.
We're fine.
We're fine, what are you talking about? I have fruit on my fruit tree, and I know the trees, because I have been out there to pick it. Been doing, working on research. And so I don't have any close hours the next month. Because my wolves line is such a and married and they go back to England and Scotland. So I'm trying to still find out so later our key, and I've got some other branches that I can't tap into. My Fitzpatrick was at 12 March map on the thing. The surname is not Fitzpatrick. The surname didn't match me, so I felt it. So I haven't been able to get, okay, it's a smart where's the church where you come to school? And then if they were ever getting up, so it's really hard to but when I first did it, all these Fitzpatrick's cousins. I got another family more now that other so I had connected it's whereas this is so deep. So I had to throw something together. So it's, and I connect. I'm humbled.
Ronan was talking about his brother yesterday and about how he liked fish. So we have probably 3 of my 6 that we schedule on one block.
I hear you. And they're hard, to do this in 1 hour. I just, and I figured questions, I don't even want to go ask me. I don't want to sit here and answer questions. Ask me.
Well,
So I don't know what's out of the batch meal. So I can't help you find the doctor's family.
well, this is a pretty nice list.
Thank you. So I got your brother up here, huh? Your brother.
He's not.
He does the okay.
Yeah.
I mean, he's like, last year.
We're very sarcastic.
Life is happier now.
into this group that's looking at DNA and relatives and all that. I know every single person that came from it. I know every one of my cousins, every one of my uncles. I know everybody that came from them that are here. Oh, anyway, about the ones that are
Nice to meet you. Lovely to meet you. You're Fitzpatrick from where?
I didn't realize you were a Fitzpatrick.
From my mother.
Exactly, your mother.
It's very good. We're probably connected, I'm sure.
Possibly. Nice to meet you.
Welcome.
Sometimes it takes a great effort to get things right. I handed this around last night. This is 2018, just in case you don't know. Half of you last night signed in the year 2000. Some of you weren't even born to say in 2000, but you signed yourselves in for 2000. So I'm going to pass it around again. Look, that's us. 2018. There's one page there. If your name is not on that, or that, will you sign it on there? Anybody who doesn't understand, sign their name on there or there. Will you put your hand? Where did you sign?
We signed in 2018 because I looked.
It's there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right. Give them a round of applause. Really, they did it right.
I don't know. I signed
Come back to me in a minute. You signed it
I don't
2000
need
twice.
to sign on this page.
I'm thinking now,
Go away.
put the line there because that was the kind of far enough up but they should have ripped that page out.
Sign again. Your name is not there. Sign again.
Well, I did, but I signed all the pages.
Okay. We're almost ready to go again.
You got it.
Susan's going to talk to us about how to solve DNA or 18 DNA. Different to empty DNA. You bet there. Go on, you give it the chair, not him. The chair.
The last thing you want is a war with a Fitzpatrick clan.
On our way, folks. Okay?
Good morning, everybody. This is my first time ever presenting in front of a crowd, so bear with me. I'm very humbled. It came to my attention that all year I promote autism on a personal and a passionate level. And I cannot make you totally overwhelmed. It's hard to do a course in 30 or 60 minutes on something that takes a long time to learn. Welcome to Basic Autosomal, the DNA. DNA does not lie. I'm a volunteer search angel trained under the group DNA Detective, again a volunteer. The founder is CeCe Moore. I help adoptees and non-paternal events find their biological family through DNA. We grow a tree from all their DNA matches, and I give them their information because it's their circus, their monkeys, and whatever they want to do. Some adoptees just want to know who their people are. Some want to reach out and try to meet them. I'd say 90% of the time it's a really good reunion, and occasionally you get one who says, I don't know. Anyway, there's no college courses on learning autosomal DNA. There are a couple courses in the US that are pretty intense, so it's kind of hard again to get this in a short narrative, and I will try my best. So I'll humbly try to share my experience and move on. I can figure this out. Okay, I got into genealogy for selfish reasons. My grandfather came to the U.S. in 1907, and his mother died giving birth to his sister in 1911. Both my grandfather's newborn sister were placed in a Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, U.S. orphanage. Grandfather was 7. He died at the age of 38. My dad and his 3 other siblings knew nothing about their family back in the UK and Ireland. I started family genealogy just the old-fashioned way in 1982 and jumped into genetic genealogy when it started. Autosomal started less than 10 years, or approximately 10 years. Was Anger's Family Tree Guide to DNA Testing and Genetic Genealogy. It's a great book. And actually, Blaine just started in 2018 a course where it's a very affordable yearly walks you through why DNA, all the courses, and I highly recommend it. I am also joining it because old dogs can learn new tricks, and if I miss anything, it's going to be good. So I'm going to be joining that also. It's pretty new. Again, I'm a volunteer and I make no money for advertisement, but Blaine is a great instructor. Topics we're going to discuss today are what companies test autosomal DNA, and when and how to contact close DNA matches. How do you work with, I'm learning, how do you work with your most recent common ancestors information? How do you grow your tree with autosomal DNA? And where do I upload my DNA to get the maximum impact? That is so important if you do autosomal. Raise your hand if you have tested with, okay. We only have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Now it's different than the Y DNA. The Y is the male line. Your father, for the men only, your father, grandfather, great-grandfather on the Fitzpatrick line for Ronan. But for us women, and I'm a family of 5, I'm blessed that my dad's around, he's in his mid-80s. He tested the Y DNA, and my sisters and I, all we have is autosomal. There's also maternal. You may want to know about your maternal side who's a Fitzpatrick, and this is one way to do that. So, where am I? Now, an amazing feeling using DNA is finding family all over the world. Local, Ireland, USA, Canada, UK, Holland, Spain, Australia, to name a few of my places where I found living cousins. Together with your DNA cousins, you can expand your tree. Click. Okay. Connect with new living cousins while you take your DNA test. Help fill in the gaps on your online tree. And if you notice here, that's me. I met a cousin through DNA and ancestry and genealogy. And we have 2 in attendance here. Joan is back in back, and her brother Terry and his son. This is Terry. Wave, Terry. And if you can see, his brother Dave lives in Holland, and my father. Now you tell me DNA. That's a lie. I mean, it's incredible.
What about Fitzpatrick Irish whiskey?
How about that? We were at an Irish festival when Joan came to Pittsburgh to visit. Let's see. One of the things I also wanted to mention on this is I knew nothing about my dad's family because he was put into an orphanage, as I said. However, I found family and I verified them, you know, with DNA. It's a long story and we really don't have time to get into how I found all this information. It's quite rewarding. And there you go. This. Okay, how does the autosomal DNA test work? One thing I have to say that I don't believe I even put in a slide is DNA is changing so drastically. Please be knowledgeable on in your own skin. Make sure you stay up to date on the changes with DNA because, you know, we talked about right protecting and, you know what you're doing. I admin over 40 family members' DNA. And I tell them all two things. One, it's Pandora's box. You open that box, you cannot get that monkey back in that box and shut that lid. So you will have surprises. Every tree will have surprises, I guarantee you. Two would be to, just make sure you know what your DNA is. And there could be in the future, something happens with DNA and I could say, well, I'm pulling all 40 back because I don't like where DNA is going. But right now, I'm all gung-ho in it, and I'm very passionate about it. I also feel that, me personally, if you use my DNA to find a murderer, like the one in California, oh, so be it. Find them. Good. Get them off the streets. So I'm glad for it. So that's my personal opinion. Everybody has to deal with their own opinion and be comfortable in that. Anyway, the company will extract your DNA from small saliva samples, and then the lab, they'll look at more than 700,000 different markers in your DNA to create a profile on you. To find people you are related to, they compare your DNA to other people who have taken the test. They look for segments of DNA that indicate you might be related. And based on how much DNA you share with another individual, they can predict your relationship. An example is a grandparent and a grandchild. Typically will have a relationship status of close family because of the amount of DNA they have in common, which is between 1,300 and 2,300 centimorgan range. And important things to remember, because everyone has autosomal DNA, both men and women can do this. It could be your maternal side. So be excited, girls, when you don't have any Y DNA to test or any male family members, because you can do this. Both men and women can do it. Your Y DNA contains a record of your ancestors, but you aren't a carbon copy of any one of them. The particular mix of DNA you inherit is unique to you. You receive 50% of your DNA from each of your parents, who receive 50% from theirs. And actually, and their parents, and so on. And each generation, it's less and less. So unfortunately, autosomal DNA, and it goes back 5 to 7 generations. When you have your parent is 50%, your great-grandparents or 25, then next generation back is 12.5, and then it kind of dwindles out. And here's important to remember, due to the DNA being inherited at random, the more you test family members on all sides, the easier it will be to narrow down exactly where they sit on your tree. Here are most of the major DNA companies that do autosomal. And family tree, obviously, you guys are aware of because a lot of you do the Y DNA. We'll talk about them. And I'm going to use Ancestry DNA. This is one of my favorites. Like I said, I admin about 40 family members, and I kind of stick with these two. In Europe, my heritage is very big. A new one on the block. It's not new, but it's really just springing off and being accepted on GEDmatch as living DNA, and 23andMe. You obviously all are familiar with 23andMe. They're having, we'll come back to that. These are most of the testing companies. Make sure you upload your DNA where possible to other DNA companies to utilize available databases. and it's free. If you do your Ancestry DNA, you can upload it free onto Family Tree DNA, and you can upload it onto MyHeritage. And the only problem is Ancestry doesn't allow you to upload onto there. So that's why me personally prefers Ancestry DNA, because you get the biggest bang for your buck, American slang. So you'll get the most impact with doing it that way. Okay, when can I contact my matches? Well, you can and you absolutely should contact your matches. My rule of thumb is I only want to contact them if there's 40 centimorgans or higher. Otherwise, it's too far out for the record keeping. Your DNA matches are potential research partners who may have information sources, stories, photographs, and knowledge that you don't. As an Ancestry member, you can contact a match by clicking the Send a Message to Them button. And it is really worthwhile to contact. I suggest when you do find a good close match, I suggest give them your personal email, because on Ancestry, you might lose your subscription, or they might stop their subscription, and you have another way to contact them. And this is why I found a gem. This is Elizabeth Hawkins Fitzpatrick. I keep finding new and surprising DNA. This is a great example. A DNA cousin living in England named Jill was able to tell me that my great-grandmother, or my grandfather, I'm sorry, unknowing to us, had an older half-sister who was left behind in England and raised by an aunt. With this DNA cousin, I was able to find living descendants, and that great aunt, we made contact with them, and they agreed to do DNA and confirmed a match, and they sent me a picture of Elizabeth, and my father and his siblings, being in their 80s, were just tickled when they knew nothing about their family back. And through genealogy and DNA, I have confirmed our family line all the way back to Ballinasloe, Galway, into the house they lived. And this is from my grandfather who was put in an orphanage. I mean, it can be done. It's a lot of work, but it can be done. My personal favorite, like I said, is Ancestry DNA. You want to link your DNA to your tree, and you want to do that in your DNA. How many of you did DNA, Ancestry DNA? Anybody? For autosomal? Okay. So when you link it, and Joan, I've linked hers to my tree. Most of my family are linked onto mine, which really helps out. Okay. Some of these things you can't see without a subscription. I'm only showing you possibilities. And I do DNA because Ancestry does not allow uploads, like I said, to other companies. So our next slide. And this is one of the features they have, is where you can see your ethnicity. You can share communities in your ethnicity. So it's nice, and a lot of adoptees want to know their ethnicity. And this is cool, I just thought I'd mention it. On my tree, it shows where they came from and where they went to, where they passed, which is, I think, a cool feature. Okay, I go here every day on Ancestry to check the people that I'm working with. I'm doing, if I'm volunteering for an adoptee, I'll check her DNA matches or his. And Ancestry is estimated at 10 million tested. That's just crazy. And I know it's only getting crazier as the years go on. Right now they're having a huge sale on FTDNA. So, they keep having these sales and people keep buying. So then I go to finding my closest DNA match. And I think okay, my closest DNA matches and relationships. So this is Jones. match, and I got her approval, and if I haven't had their approval, I've blocked them out for security. I'm just volunteering and you know, doing this. But these are John's closest match. If you see second cousin, you have Bernie Fitz. That's on Joan's side. Third cousins for Joan would be Trish Fitzpatrick. That's my sister. My first cousin. This is my first cousin, but I didn't talk to her. My daughter, Lauren, and some other matches who might be on Joan's maternal side. A lot of these are her Fitzpatrick side. So one of the things you want to look for that I have arrowed, you want to view a match. And one thing you really want to look for is somebody who has a tree. This one here is big. The bigger the tree, the usually the better. You have information. These people have information that you may not have, and I find that a lot. Find shared ancestors. A good example why you want to create a few generations when you do your DNA. If you've done it on Ancestry, this is one of the 2 companies that I want to show because I don't have enough time to go through all of the companies, so I'm going to narrow it down. But you want to do a tree so that you can get a match. This is Joan. This is my sister Pat. This is my father. This is my grandfather, my great-grandfather. So obviously, my great-grandfather and Joan's, well, that would, yeah, those 2 match as siblings. John Fitzpatrick was the eldest, born in 1858, and Thomas Henry was born, they both were born in Ballinasloe. He was born in 1872. Their parents are our common ancestors, Thomas Fitzpatrick and Winifred Flynn. Winifred she was born in Roscommon. Thomas, I'm not sure exactly where he was born. I just know that they lived in Ballinasloe when the children were born. What to do with matches? One of the things you want to look for when you have matches are your hints, the little leafies, new people, and you can star. I starred people that I've worked, and I know that who they are on our side of the family. And regions, they might have different regions of Ireland, and you might want to click on that and find people who match you in those regions. That's a pretty cool feature. Now on this shared matches, you want to go in and put in Fitzpatrick. It's highlighted and it looks like it's scribbled off. You could put Fitzpatrick in shared matches, and it'll come with all the Jones matches that are Fitzpatrick's. And there's a lot of them. And then you can also put things like Ireland. You could try Ballinasloe or Dublin and see what matches come up and see if there's any correlation in your tree. The other thing you want to do, helping adoptees, it's really hard to find Native American, so I would put in Cherokee, because some people put their name, their surname, and some people will have in their tree Cherokee, and I'll get hits. So that helps me narrow down for Native American. Let's see what we have here. Okay. This is when you go into another match. Now check for close matches. This is the second screen. On the first screen, when you click on your match, over here where the view is, and I cut that off, and you click on the match, it comes up with this screen next. And at the top, you can send them a message, and that's where I say, but it stays, Ancestry doesn't give out your email, so you're gonna have to, if you feel it's a good connection, you wanna get a personal email. Right here is really important. They're predicting, Ancestry says they're second cousins, and the possible range is between second and third, and you can click on and find what it means, and it says that it's extremely high. Now this little icon here, the eye, you want to click on that to find what total number of centimorgans you are. Before you contact anybody, make sure that their 40 centimorgans or greater, unless there's a reason. It's an odd name, and I have done that because it was a very odd surname on a case I was working. Then this toolbar here is very important. Pedigree and surnames, that's for their tree, it gives you more detail. Shared matches, this I can't stress enough, you want to pay attention to your shared matches. And then map and location, again, you can go Ireland and put in and it'll give you match names. And then if they have a tree, which Joan's cousin, Vernie, has a tree of 50 people, and I did have her authorization to present with her information. So there's a box here with shared surnames, and there's Fitzpatrick. And Flynn is the maternal name. Bolger is Terry and Joan's maternal side, I believe, correct? And then they have the names, alphabetic, the surnames, and they'll have the tree. And as you can see on the tree, Vernie's, this is her line, and there we go. We have Thomas Fitzpatrick and Winifred Finn, which is my second great-grandparents, and I believe they're first great-grandparents. See if I missed anything. Oh, and you can go to the whole tree right here and view the full tree. They give you a little short version of it here. Okay, try to get through. I'm going to try and read mine so I go faster so we have more time to play. Okay, this important thing here, this is the shared. When I said to go here, and this is big, when you click there, this is Joan's match with my sister Pat, and all the shared matches that Joan and my sister share. I would have done mine, but I did mine autosomal on FTDNA. So here's Vernie. She connects with Pat and Joan, and second cousins are my first cousins, my daughter, and then so on. And it just tells you who shares DNA with you. If I'm working with an adoptee, I want to know who shares matches with the biological father's line if I pin on him. And I want to be able to see who the matches are. So you want to click on the shared match and possibly find your most common ancestor. Another favorite I have is Family Finder. So like I said, I'm only going to go through two of them, Family Tree DNA and Ancestry. So, you know, if you're part of the Fitzpatrick clan, you should be familiar with the FTDNA. And here, if you've tested, a lot of you now have tested the Y-DNA, they keep your DNA, so you could just go on and do your autosomal. If you do your DNA at FTDNA, you have a lifetime membership. I recommend elders, if you have an elder, and I prefer, everybody should test their elders first since it is gone, since your DNA kind of dwindles off after 5 to 7 generations. Do the elders first. And another good reason is they keep the DNA for approximately 25 years. If you upload your DNA from Ancestry or another company, they have enough where you can find your matches, but you could do a little more, and one of the good features they have, it costs $19 to access, and that's a lifetime membership. So it's really affordable. And their tools that I really like is their chromosome browser. But anyway, when you're looking at their matches on how they show it, you will have the chromosome browser we'll get to. You can choose different people and do a chromosome browser on several, which I'll show you in a minute. This is my father, and the options you have is a chromosome browser in common with and not in common with. That's the same as calling Ancestry calls it shared DNA matches. On FTDNA, they call it in common with, but they also go another step and have not in common with. And on a rare occasion, you'll use that. Then you have the toolbar, you'll have the name, you'll have the match date, the day they did their DNA, relationship, and it'll tell you what they think their relationship is. And in this case, daughter, my father, and this is my sister Pat. I uploaded her from Ancestry onto FTDNA. Because there's people who do their DNA on here and have no idea that they should be uploading it off of Ancestry onto here, or people who did it here and you did it on Ancestry. This way you can find more family, and you know, your matches will be more, because some people have no idea you can do this. And I hope this here and these tools, you can email them. They give you the email. You can write notes, and if it's highlighted, like if you could see this is dark blue, that means they have a tree. That would be mine. And my sister Pat, I did not link her to it, so she is not highlighted. This is my dad's sister, Betty. She did her, because she's an elder, she did her, I chose to do her DNA on FTDNA along with my father. And then my cousin and my son. Okay, so don't forget. Okay, hold on a second. You can tell I've never done this. Here we go, chromosome browser. Now this they don't have. The sad part with Ancestry is they don't have a chromosome browser. FTDNA does, and I love this. Autosomal chromosome browser shows you segments of DNA you have in common. And the really neat thing is this is my dad, and the people that I chose to do is my dad's sister Betty, Joan Fitzpatrick, and Terry. And it can show you on what, here are the 22 chromosomes and the X DNA, and it'll show you where they match. And you can see the yellow is Betty, the green is Joan, and the pink is Terry, and how they match on chromosome 2 straight. Very nice. And then if you go down to 19, they match again over here. Now, here's a good example of why you want to do multiple family members, because as you can see, Joan is green. Joan matches on chromosome 10 here, but Terry does not. And let's say Terry matches my dad, but not Betty, because Betty is yellow. Terry matches my dad on chromosome 3, but Betty and Joan don't match. So it's just why you want to do multiple family members, because a good example is my Aunt Betty matched, I looked at all the Fitzpatrick families, the mid-1800s in Balliniso County, Galway, and I researched them forward. I could not find a match with DNA on myself, my father, or the people that I had for the family, the Fitzpatrick family now living in Australia from Balliniso. Yeah, that's a USA slang, thank you. You keep it up all weekend, I'll get it right. And then if you look, I totally lost my train of thought. Anyway, my Aunt Betty finally matched the family from Australia, the Fitzpatricks, and the other Fitzpatrick in Pittsburgh, who I had no idea there was another sibling that came, and they matched. So that's just a little example. Some of you know what a chromosome browser is, some of you don't. I just thought I'd throw that in there. Now here's the third one. Now this is not, and this is really important, it's not a DNA testing company. It's free. It's a cross-company comparison site. You all heard, and it's the killer in California.
Golden State Killer.
The Golden State. I keep wanting to say Garden. The Golden State Killer in California. They used GEDmatch, law enforcement, and created a DNA and used GEDmatch, put his DNA on, and caught him. GEDmatch has recently made a change to their rules and let you know that they're okay, and they want you to know that if you upload your DNA here, it may be used by law enforcement. So if you don't want that to happen, don't upload your DNA onto GEDmatch. Me personally, it's a personal preference. I don't have a problem with it. GEDmatch provides DNA and genealogical analysis tools for amateurs and professional researchers and genealogists. Most tools are free. You will need to upload DNA and or your family tree and your GEDCOM data to make use of these tools. Now they do have, an upper tier. You don't need it. For starting out, you have the basics. let's get through. This is just quickly what you register onto the screen with a username and password. I just want to quickly show you, make sure that you upload your DNA onto your computer. You're going to make sure you say yes. Add information if you have it. It's pretty cut and dry, but make sure you click, and when you get to the next screen, the only important thing you want to have is you want to write down your assigned kit number and keep it on you so that you have access to it. And here is their main screen. And some of the things you're going to want to do, this is where, when you're registering, that last screen I just showed you, you're going to go right here, number 1, genetic upload fast. It's self-explanatory. There's all kind of user-friendly. I highly recommend you go into the Learn section. You know, DNA for Dummies, frequently asked questions. This is a great tutorial section. These will be your DNAs, and I have a load of them, so I was just getting the top of the screen. When you see your DNA here in red, that means it's not completed. 12 to 24 hours, it'll be ready to use. And then you can go, and the main places you go is one-to-many matches. And then there's other, you know, analyze your data tools that you can use. They have their own version of a heritage, and it's different. You know, it takes some use, but again, go into the Learn More. But this is a great site. This is fun. Sometimes it's right. I find it to be off on some of my people. Are your parents related? Sometimes second cousins married second cousins. So, if they're related, there's a way to find out. They also have their version of a chromosome browser. I prefer FTDNAs, to be honest. And then here is your genealogy. If you upload a tree. Right now, I have no tree on here because they're working the new laws in Europe. If you're living, and they had living, and I really never cared for that when I uploaded for you to see birth dates of my living family. So they're working on changing that. And this is what their one-to-many looks like, and the reason, anything I want to show you here, here's your kit numbers, the type of chip they used at the company that they uploaded. Now, if it's a T, that tells you the FTDNA kit was uploaded, and A came from Ancestry. M is 23andMe, H is MyHeritage. So if it starts, it kind of tells you where they did their DNA. And then they have different little, if there's a blue, you can go onto it. You can click on it. You can click on their DNA. And here is really the important area, under the autosomal. It tells you how much they matched. This is my father's, so obviously I am first. And this is how much DNA and xDNA on the next column we match. And then I blocked it off, but on GenMatch, they give you people's email. Create a personal email if you don't want your private email in there. I do all my genealogy FitzDNA@gmail. So you'll see a ton of FitzDNA at Gmail. Now the green means it's brand new. And the lighter the green gets means after 30 days it's white. But if they're new, I'm going to eyeball those first when I'm looking at those matches. And then this is the one-to-one compare. And on that, it shows you each chromosome, 1 through 22. And it shows you where you start, where you end, and the total centimorgan. And what else can we do? Online tools and support. Your centimorgan relationship chart. You should have one if you're doing autosomal. Blogs and Facebook groups are big for learning. Here is a really old chart. I just showed you. This is the one I started with. It just gave you the basic centimorgan range for an identical twin for mother, father, or siblings. So you know. Now, 23andMe uses percents. Some of them do. And I hope I'm not going to go fast, but I want you to have fun more than sit here and learn about autosomal. Okay, centimorgan relationship chart. This is a newer one. This one goes anywhere between 23 and 39 would be a full sibling, and it's just a good chart. But here's the newest and greatest chart. It's online. You go right up here to this box, and you put in the number of centimorgans mass you have, and this is all highlighted to determine your relationship. Add the total number of centimorgans here onto the shared DNA relationship calculator, and boom, I can't even see it. What the heck? Well, that's 3,400 centimorgans. Possible relationship is parent or child. You don't have to search anywhere else. It tells you what you're going to look at. If you go lower to 1,700, it gets a little more. Now you could be a grandparent, you could be a great, you could be a half sibling, aunt, uncle. This is the only possibilities in this range. It narrows it down for you. At 40 centimorgans, and again, this is why this is as low as I go. Look how many different possibilities it could be. So you really have a lot of searching when you go that low. Anything below that, they're going to all be lit up. I hope that makes sense to y'all. But again, let's see. It's DNApainter.com. And I'll have that for you if you guys want to write that down. Okay, online supports. There's a load of blogs. The Genetic Genealogist by Blaine Bettinger. I think he's amazing genealogist. Genetic Genealogist. His page is the geneticgenealogist.com. And then you have the Genetic Genealogist. Again, I mentor under her group, CC4, with them. And it would be yourgeneticgenealogist.com, and I'll have that if you want to write that down. Facebook groups, there's a load of them. The Genetic Genealogist, the International Society of Genetic Genealogy, I saw. You want to go to those on Facebook. If you're on there, ask a question or just people's questions, and you'll learn. Genetic tools. Specific relationship suggested.